John Barrick is a senior deputy district attorney here in Ventura County with over 20 years of experience. A member of the Major Crimes Homicide Unit, he specializes in prosecuting high profile murder and gang cases. And today we're here to talk about a specific case that gained national interest and was featured on Who Hired the Hitman. And you can watch that now on HBO Max. Welcome to Ask the Expert, John Barrick.
Hello, good to see you.
Hello. Oh man, so set the scene. Let's set the stage for those of us who have not, because I didn't want to watch the episode before I talked to you. I didn't want any. So those of you who are listening, there may be spoilers in the episode on HBO Max, but set the stage for us. What's the scenario here?
So it's April 16th, 2004 in Moorpark, and the sheriff's department gets a call from a man's son asking them to do a wellness check because the son hadn't heard from his father in a couple weeks. And so a deputy arrives within a couple minutes, and he notices that there's a car in the driveway, but it's got a layer of dust on it as if it hadn't been moved in a while. And there's a number of newspapers, Acorn actually, laying in the driveway that go about approximately 2 weeks back. And so he goes up to the front door, and he doesn't open the front door, but he knocks on it. Nobody answers. And then there's a series of small windows at the top of the door. So he peeks through and he sees what he believes to be the lower torso of a man laying in the foyer. And so he gets permission from his department to go inside the house, but he doesn't want to disturb the scene. So he goes around the back to the back door. And the back door itself is open approximately 20 inches, but the screen door is closed and the screen door is locked from inside. So he tears a little hole in the screen, goes inside, and he immediately is hit with a strong caustic odor of what he described as human decay. So he eventually works his way through the first floor of the house, gets to the front door foyer, and he sees Dennis Wood lying there in advanced stages of decomposition. And so at that point, he also noticed that there were two spent 22 caliber shell cases at the scene. And so immediately he recognized a potential homicide. So he retraced his steps and called Major Crimes Unit to come and investigate.
Sounds like a scene out of a movie. Now, is this something that you are regularly that regularly comes across your desk, a case like this, or is this sort of rare?
No, this what ultimately transpired was rare. I've prosecuted cold cases before, and I've prosecuted a cold case that was also featured nationally on television a few years ago. And in fact, there's a press conference that's going to happen Monday as a result of that. We can talk about that a little bit later. So I've dealt with that type of case before. What made this one more interesting was ultimately what we realized was that this was a murder for hire scenario. And this was the first murder for hire I had worked on. And murder for hire cases are rare.
Wow. So, okay. So this series on HBO, there's 6 episodes. And which one is do you know the one that this story is in? Is it probably toward the end of the series, right? Is it the
Yeah,
one
it's
about the
episode,
computer guy?
yeah, it's episode 5, and the title
Five.
of the episode is The Genius and the Mastermind. And you can also get these series on Amazon Prime. I think you have to pay $2 to watch that particular episode.
Okay. So it was quite a while ago. And what was the process to find who done it? So you have 2 empty shell casings at the scene, and you have someone who's been deceased for a while. You got the acorn sitting there, and I think that comes out on Saturdays or Sundays or something. So having more than one is kind of alarming.
Yeah, well,
So
back then in 2004, I think they came out a little more often. The earliest known paper sitting in the driveway was from April 2nd, 2004. And I believe that was a Tuesday, but don't quote me on that. And they ended up finding 3 shell cases at the crime scene. two on a rug near the victim, and then when they rolled him over, they found a third in the bodily fluid that was beneath him. And the autopsy revealed that he was shot once in the chest and twice in the head. So what the detectives realized pretty quickly that this was an assassination. And it had all the traditional earmarks of a hit. But when they did the background on Dennis Wood, they couldn't figure out why anyone would want him murdered the way he was. Like, why would somebody basically assassinate him? He was 71 years old at the time. He lived alone. He was recently widowed. His wife passed away in December of 2002. And he was an independent salesman. And at the time, he was selling prepaid phone cards. And for people who don't remember what that was, is before cell phones, if you wanted to make a long distance call, you could get a phone card, and the long distance calls would actually be cheaper on the prepaid phone cards than it would be going through your provider. And even when cell phones started coming into their own in the early 2000s, it was still cheaper to use a prepaid phone card than it was to use your cell phone plan. But by 2004, the cell phone companies were starting to adjust. And so for Mr. Wood, the prepaid phone card business was failing. But even then, he sold prepaid phone cards and the business was failing. So detectives were really at a loss as to figure out why someone would want him executed. And
There's
so the
no
case,
seems
oh,
to be
go
no
ahead.
money in it. There's, it sounds like a very, very random and boy, an unknown, probably very little to no leads that you have. Okay,
Right.
keep going.
I wouldn't say random. I mean, whoever killed him specifically targeted him and wanted him to die. The issue was exactly who was it? This was before Ring doorbell cameras and the surveillance systems that we have in neighborhoods now. And I mean, they literally had no leads, and any leads that could have existed. Remember, they didn't find him until 2 weeks later. So there weren't any eyewitnesses coming forward or anything like that. There wasn't anything that anybody saw. So the case went cold pretty fast.
So how many years was it sitting cold?
Well, ultimately, it was sitting cold for 19 years. But the case had a number of starts and stops. In 2006, in March of 2006, Ventura sheriff's detectives were notified that the murder weapon had been located in Los Angeles. And the way that was done is uh, whenever a shell comes out of a gun, it leaves a very distinctive mark. We call them tool marks. And every single gun has a very distinctive mark. It's like a fingerprint. And so what they did was, with the shell cases left at the crime scene, in our case, they loaded those up into a national database. And so then in 2006, LA arrested a juvenile out in Compton for possession of a 22 caliber semi-automatic firearm. And when they did a test and uploaded their results into the national database, the results were identical. And so they thought, oh, great. Typically, in a murder investigation, if you find the murder weapon, you find the murderer. But the problem was that this gun happened to be in the hands of a juvenile Compton gang member who had no connection to Ventura County or Dennis Wood. And he just said that he bought the gun off the street for $125. He couldn't even remember the name of the girl who sold it to him. And, it was actually a pretty believable story. So the officers thought they had a lead, and then it went cold pretty quick. And it wasn't until 2010 when the investigation picked up again.
I love it. We're speaking with John Barrick today, a senior deputy district attorney with Ventura County, talking about the case of Dennis Wood, the Moorpark resident who was murdered by a hitman, I guess. I don't know yet. I mean, it's still uncovered here, but you can see the story on who hired the hitman on Amazon Prime or HBO. So here we are. It happened in 2004, and now it's 2010, and the cold case is opening again slightly. How did that happen?
So in 2010, there were two gentlemen facing murder charges in Los Angeles for a murder that they had committed in late November, early December of 2008. And during the trial, the defendant who did the shooting, that particular victim in Los Angeles, 2008, he had been both stabbed and shot. There was a defendant named Raul Vasquez. He was the shooter. And then there was another defendant named Alex Bracamonte. He was the stabber. And they were charged with the murder of this particular person who we'll call Jesse. And I'm only referring to his first name because his family doesn't want any attention drawn to them or the case. And so Jesse is murdered. They ultimately catch Raul Vasquez and Alex Bracamonte. They're on trial. They get convicted. Ultimately, they each get convicted of murder. Alex is convicted of first-degree murder. Raul is convicted of second-degree murder. Raul ends up with the heavier sentence of 40 years to life because he used a gun, and Alex gets 26 to life. And after that, Raul decides to speak to LA sheriff's detectives to give him some knowledge about other crimes that he committed or assisted. And one of the crimes that he talks about is a murder that he drove Alex Bracamonte to that occurred in Ventura County in 2004. The LA detectives looked into it. They realized that we had an unsolved murder in 2004. They put two and two together, contacted detectives out in Ventura County, told them they might have a suspect willing to talk. And the next day, the detectives went down there, spoke to him, and he provided details that only someone involved in the murder would know. And one of the things he said was he had said that he had driven two men to Dennis Wood's house. One was Alex Bracamonte, and another one was a man named Antoine Namey. Now, LA detectives were familiar with this name because Antoine Namey was a suspected contributor to the murder out in Los Angeles in 2008. However, they never were able to get enough evidence to prosecute him for a reasonable doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt. So Antoine Namey was never charged with that murder. Raul said that he believed that the motivation was financially based, but he didn't know the details. And he said he drove the two men there. They got out of the car. They approached Dennis Wood's door. Alex had a gun in a box, and they knocked on the door. And then when Dennis opened the door, Alex shot the man through the box, once in the chest, and then he stood over him and shot him two more times. And then they all fled together. And so at that point, detectives asked, from the crime scene, they had retrieved one bullet that had gone through Mr. Woods and lodged in the wall. So they asked the crime lab here to do a forensic analysis of that bullet. And what they came back with was that bullet had wrapped around it a piece of brown paper. And so this substantiated that what Raul was telling them was true, that he was there. So that was the first time that Antoine Namey and Alex Bracamonte had become linked to the Dennis Wood murder in 2004.
Very, very interesting. So it's all starting, the puzzle pieces are starting to come together. Okay.
Right. And then it wasn't until 2019, detectives are still investigating. They decide to re-interview Raul Vasquez. And that's how I got involved in the case. Sometimes we interview suspects and we give them what's called use immunity, which means we promise them that we're not going to prosecute them for anything they tell us. And the reason we do that is because we want to encourage them to be as truthful as possible to provide reliable information to move the case forward. So I wrote the use immunity agreement for Raul Vasquez, and cold case detectives sat down with him in 2019 and re-interviewed him. And unfortunately, that interview went sideways. Raul Vasquez told a completely different story now. He now said that he did drive Alex Bracamonte, but just him. Antoine Namey was not there. And in fact, he had no idea what the connection was between Antoine Namey and Dennis Wood. So that kind of killed the investigation at that point. Now, when detectives did go back and do some research on Dennis Wood's life, one of the things they realized is Dennis in the 90s had an accident that resulted in some short-term memory loss. And so he had a problem remembering things short-term. And so because of that, he had to develop a system of record keeping for his businesses. And he kept very detailed notes. They were fairly well organized, but he had terrible penmanship. And so for his prepaid phone card business, he kept a number of files related to all the businesses. Well, he also, part of that paperwork was a list of every vendor that he did business with concerning his prepaid phone card business. What he would do is he would buy prepaid phone cards in bulk, right, at a lower cost, and then resell them to individual businesses and people at a higher cost, and that would be his profit. And when they examined this list, which expanded a number of areas in Southern California, there was one business in Ojai, a gas station, to which he sold prepaid phone card business. And that was a business called Tony's American Gas, owned and operated by Antoine Amy. So investigators could establish that there was some relationship between Antoine Amy and Dennis Wood. But, you know, they beyond selling prepaid phone cards, they really couldn't figure out what that relationship was beyond that. They also went back through Dennis Wood's phone records, because by that time he was working with a cell phone primarily. And in the month of March of 2004, there were approximately 8 or 9 phone calls between Dennis Wood and Antoine Amy. And so they could establish that there was a connection, and that it was a connection close enough to where they called each other and did business. But outside of that, they still didn't have a motive as to why Antoine Amy would want to kill or have killed a prepaid phone card salesman. So after the Raul Vasquez interview, the case kind of took a dive, and it went cold again for another 4 years. So in April of 2023, the Ventura County Sheriff's Department assigned 2 new cold case detectives onto the case, and they were Gerardo Cruz and Eric Hernandez. And so one of the things that any cold case detective will do is before they proceed with any further investigation, they examine what's already been done. And so as part of that process, they started looking through all the crime scene photos. And the detectives at the time in 2004 took a number of photographs of the crime scene, including Dennis Wood's car. And inside Dennis Wood's car, in a box on the front passenger floorboard, were a number of these files related to his prepaid phone card business. Well, the very first file in that box was Tony's American Gas. And they did a little research, and they realized that outside that file being booked into evidence in April of 2004, it had actually never been looked in. So they pulled that file from evidence, and they opened that file, and 99% of the items in the file were invoices related to prepaid phone cards that Dennis Wood had sold to Antoine Amy. But in this file, and this is what broke the case, in this file was a single piece of paper. Stapled to it was a copy of a deposit slip, and it appeared that Dennis Wood had given Antoine Amy in early March 2004 $5,700 in cash that he directly deposited into his bank account. Additionally, on that note was a line that said "loan to Tony," and there was a post-it, and in the post-it it said money previously given to Tony, and in it said $11,000 cash, no rec, so that's NOREC. And then just below that, it said $12,000 cash, no rec. Now, let me take you back a little bit. In 2004, when detectives were investigating this case, the victim's son, a man named Bruce Simmons, who passed away in 2010, had come across a strange document. Now, at the time of his death, Dennis Wood had taken out a $100,000 line of credit on his house. The purpose of that was, number one, to pay some outstanding medical bills related to his wife's treatment and ultimately her passing. But another part of that was Dennis was trying to get new business ventures started because he recognized the prepaid phone card business was dying. Part of that investment was he purchased $40,000 worth of antique gold coins from a company called Capital Gold Group. And so they find this piece of paper, and most of it has to do with buying those coins and the process involved. But on the paper, it makes an odd reference to a friend he had given $28,500 in cash to, some promise, something about 4 times, and that this particular friend wasn't following his program, him being Dennis's program. But by itself, the detectives didn't know what to make of it, so they let it go. So now we flash forward to when detectives find the loan to Tony, and they put it together, and it all makes sense. What they realized is that Tony, among other things, was a con artist. And if you take it back to the LA murder, one of the things detectives in LA realized that Jesse had a business/friendship with Antoine Namey. And approximately $1 million of Jesse's money was unaccounted for. They couldn't find it. And during their investigation, they learned that Jesse was giving large sums of cash to Tony, and members of Jesse's family were also giving large sums of cash to Tony. And the deal is that Tony said, if you give me this cash, I'll return your investment 4 times or 5 times over. Okay. And so what the detectives realizing, and with that information, is that Tony made some promise to Dennis, probably recognizing that Dennis was desperate, because this seemed to be the type of people that Tony would lay this con on, which was he would find vulnerable people in a desperate situation, and he probably told Tony or told Dennis, "Give me your cash, and I'll return it for 4 times the investment." And by the end of March 2004, Dennis was in financial straits. That $100,000 line of credit, it was almost all gone. I think he had about $1,300 left. So he couldn't even make his mortgage. He couldn't make the loan payment. And so I think what was going on, the reason we saw an increase in phone calls is that Dennis was calling Tony saying, "Hey, like, I need to see that return investment now or give me my money back." Well, Tony didn't want to give him the money back. And so we believe that Tony had Alex kill Dennis Wood to keep the money. Now, when you add it up, it appeared that Dennis Wood had given Tony a total of $28,700 in cash, which is pretty close to the $28,500 that Dennis had written in that Capital Gold Group note. So one of the things the cold case detectives then realized is that Alex Bracamonte had never been interviewed. And they had come to me and asked me my advice on, things that they could do to bring the case forward. And I said, look, the only way we're ever going to have enough evidence to prosecute this case is, number one, if you speak to Alex Bracamonte and he fully confesses. And then number two, Alex Bracamonte would then have to be willing to testify against Antoine Namey. I said, it's the only way you're going to get the two of them. And I tell you, these detectives are so amazing. They actually made it happen. So they went, and in August of 2023, they conducted an interview with Alex Bracamonte. And at first, he kind of denied any involvement in the Dennis Wood murder, but ultimately fully confessed with no promises of leniency or anything. He just confessed. And again, provided details only the killer would know, including the shooting in the box, the entire circumstances of the murder. He said, I shot him once in the chest, 2 in the head. Remember, that those details had never been released to the public. So the public just knew that Dennis Wood had been murdered, but they didn't know the specific circumstances. And Alex gave us the reason why Namey wanted him dead. He said it was for financial reasons. And so ultimately, I filed a case against Alex Bracamonte, and he agreed to testify against Antoine Namey in exchange for a guilty plea to second-degree murder, which is a term of 15 years to life that he would serve consecutive to his current murder case. So what that basically means is that Alex is going to die in prison. He's probably never going to be released. And if you're wondering why Alex would agree to that, It's because one of the things he talked about in that interview was he was very angry at Antoine Amy because he felt Antoine Amy had put him up to these crimes. And then here he was sitting in prison all these years while Antoine Amy was out and about and living his best life. And so he didn't feel that that was fair. But of course, relying on the word of a murderer isn't good enough. I needed corroboration. And so I needed those records to come into evidence. Now, in criminal law, there's a number of what we call hearsay exceptions. If I tell you something and you can't go into court generally and testify to what I told you, right? That's basically what hearsay is. But there are exceptions in certain circumstances. And one of them was what we call is a business record exception. So the only way I could get those records into court and to be presented in front of a jury is if I could find someone to lay the foundation for those records and establish that they were, in fact, business records. And it was a little difficult because when we talk about business records, we're usually talking about real businesses. They're usually typed or on a computer, right? I couldn't find any case law that said handwritten notes could be business records. Now, in this case, I believe they could, but I needed a custodian of records to come in. And there was only one person alive left on earth who could lay the foundation for these records. And that was Dennis Wood's stepdaughter, Dawn Hauser. And the reason was because she, during the course of her life, had worked part-time for Dennis in helping him organize his notes, not only to other business ventures he had, but specifically to the prepaid phone card business. And as a result of that previous experience, she was able to come in and interpret most of the information in those records. And as a result, they were ultimately introduced into trial and utilized by the jury to ultimately convict Antoine Amy.
That's an incredible story. John Barrick, Senior Deputy District Attorney for Ventura County. And the story behind Who Hired the Hitman, Episode 5. Oh, man. How now, let me just ask a couple of closing
Yeah, that
questions
was a
here.
lot of talking. That was a
That was
lot.
amazing. I mean,
I
it was a lot
apologize.
of spoilers in case you haven't seen it, but I encourage everybody to go see that episode, watch it, and see the whole story as it plays out because it's great drama, great local drama. And cold cases are something that are I'm assuming very rare, very hard to come through with an end result. And did you guys throw a party? Is there like champagne involved that you give these new young bucks who solved the case?
No, no, no. We don't do that. What we do is pretty serious.
Right.
We we're very proud of the work we do and the justice we serve, but we don't gloat.
Right.
We don't do that.
Well, there is another cold case you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, right? That you're having a press conference coming up this coming Monday about. Give us a little bit about that, if you could.
Yeah. So this was a case that was also featured nationally. In 2018, I prosecuted a gentleman named Wilson Schuest, and he was a serial rapist. In July of 1980, in two separate counties, one in Kern and one in Ventura, uh, women were found murdered and dumped in isolated locations. One of the women was dumped in an almond orchard in Delano, Kern County, and the other one was dumped at the Westlake High School parking lot. At that time, Westlake High School was very rural. Thousand Oaks was not nearly what it was today. Um, and they had both been stabbed multiple times and murdered. Subsequent investigation revealed that the murderer was a person named Wilson Schuest. What made this cold case interesting is that both victims were Jane Does when I prosecuted the case. Um, Law enforcement, missing persons reports, they looked for them, they couldn't find anything. And then in 2020, through a nonprofit group called DNA Doe Project, uh, they were able to locate the identity of Jane Doe Kern County, which was a woman named Shirley Ann Soucy. And she was actually indigenous from the Cree Nation in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And her family had been looking for her for 40 years, trying to find out what happened to her. And the reason why that case got so much national interest is because uh, identifying Shirley, she was one of the first, if not the first, Jane Doe indigenous homicide victim to ever be identified. And so the story got picked up and carried by a number of channels and shows featured that. And it was great that she was identified, but we hadn't identified Jane Doe Ventura County. And it wasn't until this year in early January that the Ventura County Sheriff's Department Cold Case Unit was able to identify Jane Doe Ventura County. And that's what the press conference is about Monday, is the fact that she has been identified, confirmed through DNA, again, through the nonprofit group DNA Doe Project. And this was all the work of the Ventura County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit. Even a lot of times after a case is prosecuted and the appeals are exhausted, we have so much work, we just move on. But they kept working at it, trying to identify her. And that's what the press conference is about on Monday, is the fact that we were able to finally identify her and close that case officially.
Wow, through technology, through DNA evidence, huh? And through the help
Yes.
of another nonprofit. That's fascinating. Well, John Barrick, please keep us posted on all these and other cases. Anything you find fascinating that you can talk about. I know there's a lot of things you can't talk about. I'd love to ask you about the stuff you can't talk about, but I know I can. So thank you for sharing a couple of stories today. And where can they learn more if those of us listening, besides watching episode 5 of Who Hired the Hitman, where can we find more lore about cold cases in Ventura County?
Well, I can give you the information that I have regarding my cases that were featured on television. I think you can catch these on HBO Max and Amazon as well. And there was also a show on Hulu. So on a series called Cold Case Files, Season 2, Episode 26, Missing and Murdered. And again, this is all related to the 1980 Jane Doe cold case. On Hulu, there was a short docuseries called Web of Death. I'm episode 4. And then another show called On the Case with Paula Zahn, season 26, episode 5. And the name of that episode is Voice for the Nameless.
Giving us some stuff to watch, some drama for the TV and in these cold days. John Barrick, Senior Deputy District Attorney for Ventura County. Thank you so much for being our expert today on Ask the Expert. Please come back for more stories.
Oh, sure. I'd love to come back anytime.